In today's video, we ask the question, what the heck is phasing? Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Jordan and welcome to CrocodileMTG, the YouTube channel focused on learning and growing as a Magic the Gathering player, focused on the competitive scene of Magic the Gathering. So if you're new here, consider subscribing and let's go ahead and get into today's video. So today we are going to be talking about phasing and the mechanic in general because it's a little bit of a complicated mechanic that people aren't used to, but it does appear in Core Set 2021. So what is phasing? Phasing, according to the rules, phasing is a static ability that modifies the rules of the untap step. During each player's untap step, before the active player untaps his or her permanents, all permanents with phasing that player controls phase out. Simultaneously, all objects that had been phased out under the player's control now phase in. So this happens during the untap step. So what does this actually mean? Teferi, Master of Time, has a reminder text on it that simplifies this a little bit. The reminder text reads, treat it and anything attached to it as though they do not exist until the controller's next turn. So what that actually means is when Teferi, Master of Time, phases out a creature an opponent controls, that creature phases out with any equipment, auras, enchantments, or counters on it. When that creature phases out, you just pretend it doesn't exist on the battlefield. It doesn't actually change any zones. There's no like phasing zone, like there's an exile zone or a graveyard or anything like that. It doesn't actually leave or enter the battlefield. So that's important to know. If you phase out a creature with an enter the battlefield or leaves the battlefield ability, that doesn't actually do anything. It does not actually leave or enter the battlefield. It simply just ceases to exist until the player's next untap step. So what happens during the next untap step is the creature and any auras, equipments, +1/+1 counters, or anything attached to that creature let me rephrase. They do not enter the battlefield, but they begin to exist again. It does not actually change zones. It does not actually move anywhere or enter or leave the battlefield. You pretend it doesn't exist, and then when it comes back, it does exist. So one question you may have is, if a permanent is phased out with Teferi, Master of Time, how do you actually represent that on the battlefield if the permanent doesn't actually change any zones? Well, the best way in my personal experience to represent that would be to turn the permanent upside down. This has been seen in a couple cases of competitive Magic, mainly in the standard format that had cards like Jace Vryn's Prodigy. When it flipped to Jace Telepath Unbound, it had an ability that ticked up, and up to one target creature gets -2/-0 until end of turn. So whenever this ability was in place, similar to Liliana, the Last Hope, whenever this ability was triggered on a creature, what would happen would be your opponent or you would turn your creature upside down just to allow both players to recognize, that Planeswalker the previous turn plus an ability on this creature, and there is some sort of ability affecting this creature. But since the creature doesn't actually leave or enter the battlefield, this is probably a quick and easy way just to, turn your creature upside down, just as long as both players can recognize, this is phased out. And then during your next untap step, you just turn your creature right side up, recognizing it phased in, and then proceed with the rest of your turn. So with phasing being a complicated mechanic, I actually made a list of questions that I personally had, and then I went and found the answers to. Question number 1, if a permanent is phased out, can you still target it? The answer is no. So if a permanent is phased out, so if your creature's phased out, can you attach an aura to it, or can you target it? Because that permanent ceases to exist, you cannot actually target that permanent. Question number 2, does a phased out creature still get killed by something like a board wipe? The answer is also no. Because that creature is phased out and ceases to exist, something like a board wipe cannot actually kill your creature that is phased out. Vice versa with your opponent too. So if you're able to phase out your own permanent and then you board wipe, you're actually able to save your creature from your own board wipe, which is kind of unique. Question number 3. Does my creature have summoning sickness when it is phased out and then phases back in? The answer is no, it does not have summoning sickness, and whenever it phases back in, even if it just entered the battlefield the turn before, you can still attack with it or tap it for its abilities. It can attack and use its abilities as though it had haste. It doesn't actually get haste though. Question number 4. If my creature has an upkeep ability, does it still trigger on the turn the creature phased back in? The answer is yes, it would. Remember, phasing occurs during the untap step. So when it phases back in, it's actually before the upkeep. So when it phases back in, once you move into your upkeep, you're actually able to trigger that ability. If I phase out a creature that I do not control but I own, will it return to my side of the battlefield when it phases back in? The answer to that is sadly no. Phased out permanent remembers all pre-existing conditions. That is why items like auras, counters, and equipment don't actually fall off the permanent, they actually phase out with it. The phased out permanent also remembers things like who controls the permanent. So when it phases back in, unfortunately, it would still phase back in under whoever actually controlled that when it phased out. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any specific questions about phasing. I'm actually kind of excited to see it return to standard because phasing was one of those mechanics that's a little wonky and weird and kind of breaks the rules. I do think this was kind of a test run for Wizards of the Coast to see if players, to see how they kind of reacted if phasing was actually to return. I'm definitely interested to see where that goes in the future. Make sure you check out all my other content. I have some exciting new content coming up for you. Make sure you follow, like, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next Magic the Gathering video. Thank you all so much for watching. I have been gone for about a month. Really, the stay-at-home order had a really big impact on my mental health. My creative space became my workspace, and just separating the two, you know, going from sitting like 8 to 9 hours a day at a desk actually working on my career, my job, and then being able to switch over to that YouTube space just wasn't healthy for me. I did try it a little bit. The quality wasn't up to where I wanted it to be. So I did take a small hiatus from YouTube, and I do want to apologize. As things are beginning to open back up, I'm slowly going back to work a few days a week. It's becoming easier to separate my creative space from my workspace. So I'm hoping to produce a lot more content for you.